This is Natalie. She came from a very rich family and very well educated. She's a very powerful woman. So men and women alike try to get in her pants in hope of winning some favor from her. And naturally, she developed a very hostile attitude towards anyone who tried to be her friend. And she pretty much hang out exclusively with a woman named Tiffany. Okay, but this video is not about developing a background for a character. This tutorial is about creating this 2D animation shading style. Okay, so throughout this tutorial I'm gonna show you the process of creating the shader for the corset, the jacket, the glasses, the hair, and the skin. Okay, and you can see this shading style renders very quickly, so you can use this in your low budget animation or use it or in a comic or whatever you may have in mind. So yeah, let's get started. Now the first thing you must understand about the 2D shading style is to place the light correctly. Now look what happened if I move the light. So we end up with a completely different face. Okay. So in order to have a nice looking 2D shading style, you must place the light correctly. Okay. Another thing about the light is to set the size to something very small, because if you set the size to something big, like 1 meter, you can see the shadows are softer and more realistic, which is not desirable. This is a 2D shading style, so we want things to be less realistic. So let's use the size 0. Okay. Alright, so that's about the light. Let's move on to the shaders. Let's start with the corset, because this is pretty much the basic building block for the other parts. So I already have a material for the corset, but let's go ahead and get rid of that and create a new one. This one will be, let's say, Toon Shader. I mean, just a generic Toon. Okay. And get rid of the principal shader and replace that with a Toon Shader. There we go. And let's see how it looks. Alright, so this is the Toon Shader how it looks as default. So you can increase the size to increase the light part, and you can increase the smoothness to control the transition between the light and the dark. However, it does not affect the shadows. So let's set this to something small, like so. And right now you can see that the shadows, the darkness is pitch black. This is because I already turned off the indirect lighting in order to make things even more unrealistic. Okay. So the diffuse bounds is set to 0. Let's see what happens if I set this to 1. You can see the light is bouncing from the other objects onto the shadows. So we don't want this, so just set the diffuse to 0. Okay. And we will deal with the pitch black issue later on. Okay. Now you can see that the transition between the light and the dark is too smooth, and we don't want that. So let's create a noise texture, and let's create a texture coordinate and use the camera space. Okay, so let's use 2D because camera space is 2D. It's 3D, but we will only use the X and Y dimension of the camera space. So create a vector math and multiply 1 to the X and Y dimension and multiply 0 with the Z dimension. So now the texture will look pretty much the same no matter how I turn the camera. Okay, the texture is now in camera space, and let's go ahead and stretch it a little. So vector mapping, And let's stretch this along the Y dimension to something like this. Okay, something like that. And let's rotate this by 45 degree and set this back to 1. So now we have a 45 degree kind of material, texture, noise texture like this. Now we cannot rotate 45 degrees here, because it seems to me that Blender stretch first and then rotate later, but we need to rotate first and then stretch later. So we need to use two mapping nodes like so. So let's set this back to 0. Okay, so this is one direction. We need another direction perpendicular to this direction. Okay, so select these 3 nodes and Ctrl-Shift-D to duplicate all the 3 nodes. And this one will be minus 45 degrees. So now we end up with 2 textures like so. And now let's create a math node and multiply them together like so. So now we have a nice cross hatch kind of texture, and we will use this. We will use the texture as the bump for the material like so. However, you can see that the bump is a bit too strong, so set this to something smaller, and now we have a very nice painty kind of transition between light and dark. Now we need to set a single value to control the 2 scales of the bump exactly the same. So let's increase this to maybe that much. Yeah, maybe that much. Alright, now we need to deal with the pitch black issue of the shader. You can actually put in additional lights to light up the dark area, but additional lights will also make the render more realistic, so we will use as few lights as we can. Okay, so instead of putting in more lights, let's create an emission shader, and we will add this to the Toon Shader. Okay, like so. However, we don't want to just add the emission shader to the Toon Shader, because the emission shader itself will also illuminate the surrounding. So we don't want the emission shader to illuminate the surrounding. Okay, so the way we do that is to create a light path node like so, and let's create a shader, a mix shader like so, and connect the emission shader to the second input of the mix shader, and put in the camera ray to the mix shader. That means the material will only appear as emission to the camera. Okay, to any other kind of rays, the light rays, the shadow ray, diffuse ray, everything else, Blender will use a null shader. Okay, and now we can control the strength of the emission shader to control the lightness of the shadows, and we can also change the color of the shadows like so. However, let's try to make this a gray kind of. So you can see the ambient color kind of affects the highlight color as well, and I don't want this to happen. I want this to stay as close to the original color as possible. Okay, so the way we do that is to create an RGB node. Now this RGB node will be our ambient color, and create another RGB node, and this will be our main color. Okay, and create a color invert and invert this RGB, this ambient color node. Okay, so for the shadow, we will multiply the default color the original color with the ambient color. Okay, multiply and connect this to the emission color. Okay, let's just set this to 1 because we can actually control the lightness using this color, so we don't need to use this strength value. Just set this to 1. Okay, and next let's just multiply this with the inverted color and connect this to the color input of the Toon Shader and set this down a bit to something like maybe 0.6. Okay, so now this looks kind of alright. It looks gray enough. Okay, so now let's try different colors, and you can see this remains pretty much the same, right? Now of course it does change a little bit, but it's not very noticeable. So yeah, let's just leave it as that. There we go. So maybe lower the ambient color a bit. Okay, so now we have a very nice Toon Shader. Okay, now this will only works for cycles. Okay, if we are to switch to material preview, and let's wait for the shader to recompile. Alright, so now we switch to Eevee, and you can see this is still pretty much the same default material, and yeah, so this material will only works for cycles. The shader is quite complex, and every time we make change to this shader, Eevee will have to recompile the shader, which is very slow. So let's just set this to cycles. So now Eevee will not recompile this shader. Now we need a simple shader for the Eevee engine to preview our textures. Okay, so create another material output node and change this one to Eevee, and create a diffuse shader connected to the Eevee output, and connect the original color to the color of the Eevee material. And let's put this bump in the Eevee as well. So now Eevee will be a lot faster to recompile because the shader is much simpler, and cycles will use the full-blown setup. Next, let's create a glossy layer for the material. So copy this Toon Shader. Okay, let's switch back to cycles. There we go, and also connect the normal and change this to glossy. Now let's see what it looks like. Let's select the material output, the cycles material output, and Control Shift click here, and you can see the glossy layer is reflecting the surrounding, which is what we need. So we can lower the size of the glossy to make it look more glossy. Okay, and we can increase the smoothness like so. Okay, and we can mix these two together like so. There we go, and we can lower this to reduce the specularity of the corset. So let's just get this down to 0. Okay, so this will be our generic Toon Shader. Okay, wait a minute, just connect this here. There we go. So this will be our generic Toon Shader, and we will now group the entire setup into a single node group. Okay, so let's select all these, leave the color input and the 2 outputs. Okay, and Control G to group them all, and let's name our input. This will be color, this is ambient, and let's create a few more input slots. And let's see, we have size, we have smoothness, and we have the specularity, we have another size, another smoothness, and yeah, that's it. Alright, hit tab to go out and name this one generic Toon Shader. There we go. So now we can change the size, we can change the smoothness, and we can increase the glossiness. And let's rename this to diffuse size. This one is diffuse smoothness. This is specularity, and this is the gloss size, and this is the gloss smoothness. There we go. This is the EV, and this is cycles. There we go. Wait, hold up. Something is wrong. This is cycles, and this is EV. There we go. Alright, let's hide away the jacket, get rid of the hair and the skin as well. Alright, now we need some inking kind of effect for the material. So let's create a layer weight, no, not that one, layer weight node, and we will use this facing. Let's create a material output and put this facing to the material output. So the facing output of the layer weight will give us something similar to the Fresnel. However, this layer weight is it produces a more linear kind of transition between the black and white. Okay, so let's create a color ramp node and increase the black to something like that, and decrease the white a bit, maybe increase the black a bit more. So now we have a very nice white edge around our object. Okay, so create a color node, mix node, and get rid of the material output, and connect this one to the factor, and connect the color to color 1, and connect this over here, and set this color to black. Okay, so now we have a nice black edge around our object. Okay, alright, so that is about the basic Toon Shader. Okay, let's move on to the jacket. So let's get rid of the material of the jacket and create a new one. Jacket, okay, and delete that one and create the group that we have just created, the generic Toon Shader, and connect this to the cycles output, and copy this and connect the EV output over here. There we go. Alright, now this is our jacket, and let's set the jacket to something blue, like so, and let's set the ambient color to something blue as well. Now we have something like that. Let's increase the color, the brightness of the ambient, maybe something like that. Alright, alright, now we can increase the specularity. Alright, now it seems that we made an error. We need to connect this color to the Toon color as well, the glossy Toon Shader as well. And now we have something like this. Okay, so we can increase the specularity to make the jacket looks more glossy. Okay, maybe something like that, and increase the size a bit. So you can see the 2D shading style is all about faking the stuff. Okay, it's not about accuracy, it's about the artistic control of faking stuff. Now for the jacket, I want the surface that point up to be a bit brighter. Okay, so we can actually create a geometry node, and we use the Z dimension of the normal. Connect this one. Make sure to select the cycles material output, otherwise the control shift click will send the connection to the other one. Okay, so we can use the normal, the Z dimension of the normal, to select the faces that point upward, like so. And we can now create a color ramp node and increase the black key to the right, like so. So now we selected the faces that, the areas that face upward. Okay. However, we don't have that crosshatch kind of transition when we do this like this. So we're gonna go in here and we're gonna copy the entire bump group. Okay. Hit Control C and tap to go out, and Control V to paste. Okay, now this bump node will produce something very similar to the normal, but it produces a bumpy kind of normal instead of the normal kind of normal. Okay, so we're gonna use this one, and we're gonna put this into the separate XYZ node, and let's see. So now you can see we have a very nice crosshatch kind of transition between black and white. Okay, so let's bring everything back a bit, and we're gonna create a RGB node, and we're gonna create a color curve node, and we're gonna connect this to the factor and connect this color to the color. Maybe we don't even need this color, just set the color directly in here, like so, and increase the brightness of the color a bit. Now let's place your cursor here and Control C, and then place your cursor here and Control V to copy the color from here to here. Okay, and put this into the color input of the generic Toon Shader. Now we have something like this. Okay, now it's just a matter of tweaking the shader to our liking. Maybe something like that, and maybe something like that. Alright, so that's about the jacket. Let's move on to the glasses. So you can see the glass has these two fake gloss in it. This is not the reflection of the light. This is actually fake glossiness. Okay, this however is the reflection of the light. So yeah, it's a combination of fake and real reflection. So let's go ahead and delete the Toon Glass shader and create a new one. Okay, and again, just get rid of the principal material. Now before we get to the business of creating the glass, let's take a look at the glasses themselves. I made it thick like this is because originally I planned to use the glass shader, but in the end I changed it, so only the outmost layer matter. Okay, the inside, these faces don't matter. Okay, so only the outside face here matter. And let's see the UV of the glass. So select everything and get rid of the texture. So this is the front face of the glass, and this is the back face and the side of the glass. Alright, so now let's work on the glass. And the first thing we need to do is create a transparent, no, not translucent, I mean transparent shader. There we go. And an emission shader, like so. Let's create the mask to control this factor. Okay. So create a UV map. Not that one. UV map. There we go. And select the UV. And create a vector math. And subtract 0.5 from the X and Y. Make sure the Z is 0. Okay. Now create a texture gradient. Connect this one over and change this to radial. And let's see. Alright, it looks like this. Okay, now let's see what happens if we don't turn on the flip view of the mirror modifier. You can see the texture is kind of flipped like so, and we don't want that. We want the texture to be not flipped like this. Okay. Now create a math node and multiply this by 2, and copy this math node and change this to fraction. Now we have 2 repeats for each lens of the glasses. Alright, bring everything back a little, and let's create a color ramp node and bring the black key to the right like so, and maybe bring the white key to the left. Now we only care about the transitioning part of the gradient. We don't care about the black or the white part. Okay, we only care about the part where the color kind of start to transit from white to black. Okay, so let's bring this down like so, and create another color ramp node. This time set the center key to white and the 2 side keys to black. Now we have something like this. Okay, and let's bring everything back a little more. Now create a color an RGB curve node and bring the center key up a little bit like so. Alright, let's leave this as that for now. Now copy the vector math node and connect this one over and change this to the length option. This will give us a nice circular kind of gradient from the center to the edge of the lens. And again create another color ramp node, and this time bring this to something somewhere like that. Okay, now copy these 2 nodes, Shift D, copy, and connect this one over, and let's see. Let's bring this over here. Alright, we have a nice circle like this, and place these 2 over here and create another math node and connect the 2 curves over and change this to multiply, maybe? Yeah, multiply. Okay, we now have something like this. Alright, copy this math node and change this to greater than, and just leave it as 0.5, and now we have a very nice kind of reflection. We can change the size of the reflection however we like. You can even animate it, but yeah, it's not the scope of this tutorial. So yeah, let's just leave it as that. Alright, now we can put this greater than node to the factor of the mix shader. There we go. And let's set this to 3 maybe. Yeah. Now again, the problem is that this light will also illuminate the scene, and we don't want that, so we will use the same trick with the light path. like so, and copy this math node and connect the camera array over here and change this to multiply. There we go. And there we go. Now this will only appear as white to the camera. For anything else it will be just transparent. Okay, so that is the glossiness of the glasses. Let's move on to the frame of the glass. And the frame of the glass is actually just a single glossy toon material, so there's nothing to say there. Okay, now let's move on to the hair. Now the hair is actually a bit tricky. Okay, so let's get rid of the render. For the hair, it's actually better to just sculpt the hair and use the generic Toon Shader. However, sculpting the hair is not something that I practice a lot, and I was not very sure about the hairstyle I want for this character, so I need to tweak the hair a lot and try out many different styles of hair. So I find that the strand kind of hair is faster to do, so yeah. So if you have time, just sculpt the hair and use the generic Toon Shader. It's gonna be much better, okay? But since I already have the strand kind of hair, let's go ahead and create a Toon Shader for the hair as well. Okay, so delete the hair shader, hair material, and create a new one. This will be hair, and go to the particle settings and go down here and select hair as the material for rendering. Alright, now let's try the render. Okay, so let's get rid of the principal shader again, and for the hair, let's go to the render tab and let's find the hair section. Here it is, the hair section. Now let's create a diffuse shader. There we go. By default we have the shape as thick, and we have line segment as primitive, and this is the default, and you can see the cylindrical nature of the hair. And for the Toon Shader of the hair, we don't actually want that. We want the hair to be ribboned, and we want this to be curved segments. And maybe tweak the subdivision a bit. Yeah, I think 2 is good. Alright, so let's go back to the material, get rid of the default material, and let's create another toon material. There we go. And set this one to something around 0.6 or 0.7. And let's increase the smoothness a little. There we go. And copy this Toon Shader and change this to glossy. And we will now add this to the Diffuse Toon Shader. Okay, and let's put in some color for the hair. There we go. Alright, let's tweak the glossiness of the hair a little bit. So yeah, let's lower the size a bit and increase the smoothness a bit, like so. Now if you don't want to just simply add the entire thing over like this, you can actually create a mix shader like so, and connect the glossy Toon Shader to the second input, and you can lower this factor to 0 to have no glossy at all, or bring this one all the way to 1 to have maximum glossiness. Okay, and you can have something in between. Maybe just leave it as 1, like so. Now there is actually a sunlight from the back, so I want the hair to glow up around the edge like so. So let's go ahead and create another shader. This time create a translucent shader. And let's take a look at the translucent shader. It looks something like this, and you can see it kind of glow up to the backlight like so. So we can now connect the color of the hair over to have the hair glow in the back like that. And we don't want it to glow in blue like this, and we want it to be a bit desaturated. So let's create a hue saturation node and lower this to maybe 0.7, maybe 0.8. Yeah, 0.8 is better. We can now add the translucency to the hair, and now we have something like this. Okay, let's go ahead and tweak the hair color a little. There we go, that's way better. Now we also want to make the hair not pitch black in the shadows. Okay, so again we need to have ambient color. So create an emission shader, and again use the add shader to combine the emission with the rest of the material. And let's connect the original color to the emission as well. And again we will use the light path trick to force the emission to not illuminate the surrounding. So we're gonna put the camera ray over, and this time we need to add a math node and change this to multiply. So now we can lower the effects of the ambient light like so. Alright, let's go ahead and increase the number of hair a little, maybe 50. Alright, this is better. Maybe just add some randomness to the hair color. So create the hair info node and use the random output here to control the color of the hair. Create an RGB curve node and connect the randomness to the factor and lower the brightness of the hair color a little. This is the hair color after the randomness, the randomization. Alright, that's it for this video. I'm gonna get to the skin material and the outlines in the second part of the tutorial. I'll see you next time.